Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. Today guys, I'm going to be doing another tournament review and after action report for the event that I went to this weekend. Now in case you've not seen one of these videos before, what I like to do is firstly I go through my list and I explain why I took each unit, and then secondly I like to go over what I call the lay of the land. Now the lay of the land covers a whole bunch of things. It covers what the kind of event it was it a team event, a singles event, was it WTC? Was it ITC, anything like that. And it also covers the player skill that could be found at the event. Was it a relatively friendly tournament or was it a bit of a shark tank? Once that is done, I then go through each one of my games and I give a general overview of what happened in each game, what the final result was, and my thoughts and lessons learned from each battle. And then of course at the end we do a little bit of a wrap up and we go over the general feelings and vibes that we got from the event and also overall what were the main takeaways. Now don't worry if you're not that bothered about listening to the introduction or the lay of the land. I will have chapters down in the video description so you'll be able to skip ahead to the part of the video that you want to watch. But that is everything. Without further ado, let's dive into today's video. Now, the very first thing I want to say is a massive thank you to the event organisers. The event was run by a club called Northern Warlords. It's actually a club that I'm part of, and they always put on a great event. The tables were all set up really well. The timings were all done perfectly. The pre-tournament list submission and review and all that kind of good stuff was done very, very well. So overall, I want to say a massive thank you to Matt, Stu and Dan for putting together another fantastic event. If you ever get the opportunity to go to a Northern Warlords event, I highly recommend it. They're always incredibly well run and I've never had any issues at any of them. I think they are actually running a winter teams event next February, so if that sounds fun, you want to get a bunch of friends together, I think it's a 4-man team event, then you should seriously check it out. I also want to say a massive thank you to the venue for the event, Element Games. I have been to many events at Element Games over the years and they've always been really well run, and a big part of that is thanks to the support that the venue gives. They always have plenty of staff on hand to make sure that the bar is always manned and there's plenty of chances for people to get drinks and food throughout the whole day. The staff are always really friendly as well, and overall they're just a great group of people. They also have a massive shop attached to the venue and it's filled with all sorts of goodies. You can buy everything from Games Workshop stuff to Cromlech bits for your tanks. It's just amazing. So overall, it's a great venue and a great shop. Now, slightly shameless plug here guys, but Element Games does support this channel and they have provided me with an affiliate link which I've put down in the description below. By using that link, you'll be able to go to Element Games and save to 25% off on your future Warhammer purchases. It also really helps support the channel. On top of that, Element Games has given me a referral code, TIM3921, and if you use that at the checkout at the end of your purchase, you will earn double store credit on your future Warhammer 40k purchase with Element Games, which means overall you're going to save tons of money in the long run. It's just a great way to support the channel and at the same time save yourself a lot of money on your 40k and other wargame purchases. I do have a bunch of other affiliate links down in the description below, both those for the UK and the US, so if you want to purchase some Warhammer and help support the channel, then please consider checking those links out down in the description below. But that's all the shameless plugs for now. That's all the thank yous for now. Now let's dive into the main part of the video. So the list I ran for the event was my classic Armageddon Steel Legion, and there were a number of reasons that I decided to go with this list. The first reason was I needed something that I was familiar with. I have run this list or similar styles to it for many years throughout 8th and 9th edition at this point, and it's one that I know instinctively like the back of my hand. I know how far my infantry can move, how far my chimeras can go, how much punishment each unit can take. I can just play it relatively instinctively, and that allows me to focus on the bigger picture and the overall strategy when I am playing my game. So I took this list for its familiarity. Another big reason I took this list was because I wanted one that I knew could handle the dense terrain boards of 9th edition. I've been to many Warlords events and they always follow a WTC style of terrain, which basically means it's all L-shaped ruins and it's all very dense. Now I have found that even though this is a mechanized list, because I'm able to spam so many heavy flamers, that it means that I can use the terrain to my advantage to get those flamers up close and personal without taking as much damage. And if someone charges me, it's fine. I'm happy to stay in combat and burn my way out. Fun little side note, because this list has so many heavy flamers in it, what I like to do is actually run the vehicles in pairs. Sometimes an overconfident opponent will go, I can wrap and trap those vehicles and then I'll be safe in my turn from the guard shooting. But actually what ends up happening is the more vehicles that they wrap and trap, the more vehicles that just end up burning, the more heavy flamers they get hit with. I can't tell you the number of times someone has sent in a not particularly powerful unit to try and sort of wrap a vehicle and thinking that, I'm keeping it safe for my turn, and then it just gets burned to death. So it is a quite effective way of running this kind of mechanized list. But if I'm going to be honest with you guys, there was really only one reason that I took this list, and that is because this is going to be the last event I do with the 8th edition Codex. After this, it's going to be 9th edition all the way, baby. And the thing is that I wanted to give the old girl a good send-off. The 8th edition Codex has been good to us, and she's served us faithfully throughout the last 5 years. And what's interesting, guys, is that this Armageddon Steel Legion list is one that I built at the very beginning of 8th edition. I got all of the Chimeras together, all of the tanks together, and even though I had all of my Mordians, I'd always wanted a purely mechanized Armageddon Steel Legion army. And so this list really does have, this army really does have a little special place in my heart, because it was the army that really, truly invigorated my love for 40k again. I always loved my Mordians, but there's something special about just building an army from scratch in one go, and that really is this Armageddon Steel Legion list. It is my 8th edition army, and so I thought it was only appropriate that the Mordian Glory 8th edition army took the 8th edition Codex out for one last spin. So that were the thoughts and feelings behind the list, but what was I actually running? Well, it's pretty simple, guys. I've got 6 Chimeras, each one with double heavy flamer, and I had a few points left over, so I slapped the Storm Bolter on each one as well. Inside each one of those Chimeras is an infantry squad. Each infantry squad has got a sergeant with a bolter and a power sword. There's a Voxcaster in there as well, and I've taken a plasma gun in every single squad. 3 of the squads, I've got the classic RPG style missile launch for the Steel Legion, and 3 of them have got the heavy bolters. Supporting all this infantry is 3 platoon commanders as well, and this infantry and Chimera core gives me a really solid foundation for this. It's a decent amount of objectives secured, it's a great amount of screening with all of those double flamer Chimeras, and in a pinch the infantry can do a little bit of screening as well, although their main job is to go around and take objectives and hold some important points on the battlefield. On top of this foundation, we have got the main firepower of the list, which is 3 Lehman Russ Demolisher tank commanders, each one with triple heavy flamer. These are my bruiser tanks. They bring a huge amount of firepower in a concentrated package, and they're relatively affordable as well by 8th edition standards, each one running me at about 225 points. The Demolisher cannon is the main wallop. It really does just take a chunk out of anything that you throw it at, and the heavy flamers also help the vehicles from getting tied up, and they also in a pinch just provide a really decent amount of volume of fire for the Lehman Russes as well. But I can't tell you the number of times, a bit like with the Chimeras, when someone's tried to tie them up and I have just burnt my way out. One of the funniest things that has happened, it wasn't at this event, but has happened at a previous event, is a Harlequin player thought he could tie my Lehman Russ up with one of his little floaty boats, and then in my turn, I spent 2 CP on Hail of Fire, and I got maximum shots from my heavy flamers and just burned that boat to a crisp. Triple heavy flamer really is a great way of stopping your tanks from getting tied up, and I am a big believer of it for my 8th edition Russes. I know some people prefer the multi-melters, but for me, I'm a flamer man. And last but certainly not least, we had some indirect fire seasoning for the list. 2 full payload manticores and a single squad of mortars. Now, I know what some of you are going to be saying. Mordian Glory, I thought you preferred Basilisk. I do prefer Basilisk, but I wanted to run an army that had a 100% cohesive colour scheme, and that's why I went for the Manticores, because they match my Steel Legion army. And I had a few points left over at the end of the list, and I thought, you know what, chuck in a squad of mortars in there, they'll help supplement the indirect fire as well. So that is the units. They all fit inside a single detachment, which is a battalion. The regiment trait I took with this army was a custom one. I went for gunnery experts and spotter details. I mean, I just have so many random shot weapons in this list that gunnery experts really just makes sense, and of course I want to make sure those demolisher cannons are as effective as possible and have an extra range thanks to the spotter details. Secondary objectives for this list tend to be inflexible command, boots on the ground, and also special orders, although I do leave that third one open just in case I come across someone who has, lots of vehicles or monsters, so I can do bring it down. But those tend to be the 3 objectives that I keep in mind when I'm playing this list. Just a couple of small other things to mention. One of the platoon commanders is the Warlord, and that Warlord tends to stay near the mortars, helping me keep my inflexible command and also staying safe, not giving away any potential assassination bonus points to the enemy. And of course, this list starts with 4 CP because the only pre-game CP I have spent is on the 2 full payload manticores. So now it's time to get into the lay of the land. What kind of tournament was this, and how much of a Shark Tank was it? So the first thing to mention is that this was a team tournament, and there were 8 people on each team, and there were 10 teams in total. Now this is actually the biggest team event that I've seen. Normally they're sort of 4-man teams. 8-man teams is pretty crazy, but it was a lot of fun. Now, I want to be clear, we're not talking about some sort of doubles-like event where you've got 2 people on each side of each table. No, this is very much still a singles tournament in terms of you play against one other person, but how the pairings are done is very different. Essentially, each team captain goes through a process of putting a player forward, and then the opposing team captain gets to decide which one of their players they want to put into that list. There is a little bit more to it. There are some dice rolls involved to decide who's going to be able to put forward the first player, so on and so forth. But the main takeaway is that your pairings aren't totally random. In fact, if you've got a good captain who's able to play the game quite well, then he can try and give you a favourable pairing. So for example, my list has a crap load of AP-1 heavy flamers, so I told my captain Chris I would ideally not want to go into anything that's got Armor of Contempt because it means that it neuters a lot of my firepower. Now of course he can't guarantee that I won't go into something with Armor of Contempt, but it does mean that when he's deciding which player should go forward and he knows what they've still got left on their team to put forward, he can try and influence it a little bit to make sure that I get a better matchup for my army. So that's how the pairings were done, but the tournament scoring was also done a little bit differently as well. It was using WTC style scoring. Now what that means is that the in-game points are the same as you are familiar with it right now. There's 100 points up for grabs, 45 secondary, 45 primary, and 10 painting point. However, to determine who won the game, you look at point differential. And so if both players have got within 5 victory points of each other, then the game is considered a draw. So for example, if I've got 75 victory points and my opponent's got 78 victory points, even though in a normal game of 40k, he would have won that by 3 points, under WTC, that is actually considered a draw. And in that scenario, both players would score 10 points for their team. You see, there is a total of 20 tournament points available for each game. And the point differential determines how many of those points each player gets. So if it's a straight draw, then each player gets 10 points. And you'll hear me refer to that as a 10-10. If one player ends up getting just slightly more points than the opponent, maybe they end up squeaking out by getting 6 or 7 more victory points than their opponent, then that would mean that the person that won the game would earn 11 tournament points for his team, and the person that lost the game would still earn 9 tournament points for his team. Now, I really like this way of scoring games because it encourages players to fight for every single point. Because even if you're losing the game, even if things are going a bit sideways, there's no point in conceding. You might as well play a little heart out and go for every victory point possible, because that might mean that the victory point differential is closer and you'll walk away with still some points for your team. I mean, there were a number of times this weekend where I lost my game, but because I was able to bring my opponent's point differential down and score a few extra points for me, it meant that overall our team either got a draw or we actually got a win. Even though I on an individual level had lost, my team had won. So that was how the scoring was done. And of course, I should mention it was a 2-day event with 5 games across the 2 days, 3 on the Saturday and 2 on the Sunday. Now, of course, one of the biggest things that goes into the lay of the land for an event is the player skill. How much of a Shark Tank is it? Is it going to be game after game against some of the best opponents in the country, or is it going to be a more friendly event against people that are just looking to have a good time? Well, in this case, and as the case of many Warlords events, I would describe it as a Shark Tank. The vast majority of players there were very, very skilled, and they were all running decent lists. You had everything from Votan there to pretty much every Necron player running the same list that just sat there scoring 100 points. There was really only one or two subpar or wacky Johnny Rambo lists out there. The rest of them were fairly familiar and were being run by players that knew how to pilot them. So yeah, overall I would describe this as a competitive event. Everything from the terrain to the list to the player skill meant that it was going to be a really intense but also very enjoyable event. But now that we've covered all of the lists and the lay of the land, now it's time to get into everyone's favourite part of these videos, the game overviews. So game one, I was paired into Necrons. I actually got to play it against a good friend of mine, Mr. Tom Layton. Now me and Tom have played each other several times over the years. We've crossed swords and you know, it's been a fairly equal win and loss rate for each one of us. But the last couple of times that I've faced Tom, including this time, he has been using Necrons. And as we all know, Necrons are an incredibly powerful faction right now. Their datasheets are kind of lackluster, their abilities and command protocols are a little bit frustrating, but the fact they've got access to so much OBSEC and some of the best secondaries in the game mean that most Necron players will be able to score 90 plus points in every single game they go into. And Tom is certainly an experienced player and he's backing it up with a pretty good list. He's got the Silent King who's able to provide huge amounts of buffs to the units around him. He's got two big units of Scorpec Destroyers which are a really difficult melee threat for my list to deal with. And he's got two big blocks of regular destroyers as well. I think there's 6 units in each one and there is also a heavy destroyer there as well. So lots and lots of destroyer, Dakka and chopper in this list. He also has a pair of annihilation barges, a cryptek with the Veil of Shadows and then a single unit of Tomb Blades. These units provide even more mobility to the list but also a little bit of utility as well. The annihilation barges can do some pretty good firepower and also they're relatively difficult to remove thanks to their inbuilt transhuman. And the 2 units of Tomb Blades allow for some early game grabbing which helps with the Necron secondary. So overall this is a strong list run by a strong player. Now this first mission was Data Scry Salvage. It is a 6 objective mission and it is corner deployments. Each player has to control 2 objective markers to score at least 4 victory points, 3 objective markers to score 8 and then more than their opponent to score an additional 4 points. So holding 2 objectives can always be a little bit of a tricky one. Trying to get any victory points means that it can be kind of easy for your opponent to try and stop you from getting any victory points if they just knock you off those middle field objectives. And the second part of the mission was if you do an action on your home objective, you get a point for each midfield objective that you hold at the end of the turn. Now in terms of secondary objectives, I took boots on the ground, inflexible command and special orders. I figured special orders would be quite good to do on a 6 objective map. And then Tom took the classic Necron ones of technology of ages, ancient machinery and purge the vermin. And then after all that was done, we finally rolled off and we got to get to the first turn and the Necrons got turn 1. And that's really big for the Necrons because it means they're able to move out and start controlling the middle of the board, which is exactly what they want to do to try and achieve their secondary objectives as early as possible. To be honest guys, the Necrons getting that turn 1 gave them a really big advantage. Tom was able to start doing ancient machinery very quickly and also his treasure of Aeons. So it really did put the Necrons in a commanding position right from the get-go. So the Necrons did move out into that commanding position and then the damage output was relatively low. I mean essentially the Silent King was just using his little floaty men here things to try and zap some tanks, but overall I didn't actually take many casualties on my first turn at all. I think one of the Lemurus Demolishers took a bit of a hit, but that was it. In my return I actually trundled out with a couple of my Lemuruses to get some decent angles and I moved forward with in a fairly aggressive manner with my Chimeras. I've played this game before against Necrons. If you're too timid against them, then they run away with the points. But the thing is you can't sacrifice your OBSEC early on because they're all OBSEC as well. So what you want to do is to try and put pressure on a couple of areas on the board and start trying to deny them the points that they need. So I moved forward aggressively, but I didn't expose any of my infantry. I was kind of playing the long game. I figured that Tom was going to get an early lead on his points, but then my firepower should start to show. I mean, I definitely outshoot this list. I've played against it before and I easily outshot it. So I figured wait for some opportunity to come around turn 3, turn 4, turn 5 and hopefully that might allow me to start bringing the game back and make it pretty close. Now, Tom had exposed his Silent King in his turn 1, and I thought I had a good chance of actually nuking it. So I moved forward with one of the Demolishers and managed to get it into range, and I thought one Demolisher tank and a couple of Manticores might actually be enough to take a serious chunk out of the Silent King in one go. And if I'm able to deal with the Silent King in a single turn, and guys, I've done it before with this list, then it means that it actually really puts the Necrons on the back foot, because a lot of their damage output relies upon the buffs that the Silent King could hand out. If he doesn't exist, they can't get their buffs, and I easily start winning this firefight. If I can nuke the Silent King turn 1, it means that I might actually be able to put the Necrons on the back foot by the end of turn 2, which gives me 3 full turns to try and pull this game back. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I actually did really well against Silent King, and I used Hail of Fire on my Demolisher tank to get 12 Demolisher shots. And I pretty much hit with nearly all of them and wounded with most of them as well. In fact, after the dust had settled, I had done 8 or 9 wounds with Demolisher Cannon against the Silent King. Unfortunately, this is where the luck of the dice came in, and Tom rolled a fantastic number of 4+ invulnerable saves. In fact, I believe out of the 9 wounds that I did, only 1 of my Demolisher Cannon shots got through, and even when it did go through, it only did 2 damage. And this is going to be a theme throughout the tournament. I think that there were less than half a dozen times throughout the whole tournament where I rolled more than a 1 or a 2 on the damage for my Demolisher Cannons. Now, because I hadn't been able to pick up both of the Menhirs, it meant that when I then went to launch the Manticores into the Silent King, he pretty much was just able to wear it. I did knock him down to about 11 wounds by the time the dust had settled, but it wasn't quite enough, and at the end of the day, that really put me on the back foot even further, because it meant that Tom had a whole another turn of excellent firepower thanks to his Silent King. And because of that, he was able to do quite a lot of damage to my Armored Core, killing one of the Leman Russes and doing multiple damage to many of the other chimeras. I think overall he killed 2 or 3 vehicles in his second turn. That meant I had a lot less firepower to play with going into my turn 2. And as a result of having a lot less DACA in my list, it meant that it took me a turn longer to achieve my initial aims, and it meant that the Silent King didn't go down until the end of turn 2. Ideally, at that point, I would have liked to have taken out a Silent King and some of his, and all of his Scorpec destroyers, and then I could have started getting into a proper firefight with his regular destroyers, which I know without Silent King support, I'm fairly easily able to deal with. So as a result, the game then set into a fairly predictable pattern of the Guard slowly overwhelming the Necrons with their firepower, but the Necrons sacrificing their troops in order to score many of their secondary points. However, it didn't all go Tom's way. I was able to do a lot of work on my secondaries as well, and when it got towards the final turn of the game, I was able to significantly deny him many of his Purge the Vermin points. In fact, by aggressively using my Chimeras, Tom actually really struggled with Purge the Vermin in this game. In fact, by the end of the game, the final score was relatively close. The Guard had managed to get 74 victory points overall, and the Necrons had got 88. Now, I was quite proud of myself in this game, because not only was the point differential relatively low to the point where I actually was still able to score 8 victory points for my team, but also it meant that I'd caused a Necron player to not just get those automatic 90, 95 plus points that they always get. Little personal achievement for me there. Now, as a result of me being able to play my little heart out and do fairly well on the objectives and on the mission, it meant that I was able to score some pretty decent points for my team. And overall, that meant that the first round for my team went from being a loss to a draw, which was very, very nice. And this is because if Tom had got a much bigger victory, let's say he'd got his 95 points and I'd only got about 60 points on mine, it would have meant that the points differential would have been much bigger, he would have scored more points for his team, and they would have won the overall round. So overall, I was really proud of my performance in this game. Last time me and Tom faced off with pretty much the exact same lists, he did get 99 victory points, I believe, and I only got about 60 something. So overall, I was able to achieve more victory points than I normally would, and I was able to deny more from the Necron player. So little personal victory for me there in game 1. But that is the end of game 1. Now let's go into game 2. Now, unfortunately, going into game 2, I actually ended up with a bye round. That means that there was no one for me to play. The opposing team, one of their players just hadn't turned up on the day, which meant there were 7 on their team and 8 on our team. Now, as a result of me getting a bye, it actually meant that I technically got a 20-0 victory, but that feels kind of weird, so I like to think of it that I basically got a draw. I neither won nor lost. I didn't really play, guys. Now, overall, it was a bit of a shame getting a bye, because obviously I want to try and get as many games in as possible so I can create great content, but I didn't waste my time. I actually went around the tables and made some sort of observations about the general feelings that I was getting from the game. Now, one of the first things that I noticed was how similar so many of the lists were. Pretty much every team had a Necron player, and every player's Necron army was pretty much some variation of walk into the middle of the board, get the objectives, and, score all the points. Many people were using Scorpex, they were using Destroyers, there was a Silent King, there was a Cryptek. It was pretty much cookie cutter from each table, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, obviously that kind of shows that Necrons are kind of in a one build area right now, but it's obviously very, very powerful because, like I said, this was a Shark Tank, and even the top tier team there at the event, the International Team England team, was running Necrons with pretty much that exact setup, Scorpex, Destroyers, Wraith, all that kind of stuff, just moving into the board, having a great time. So I thought that was really interesting to note that a lot of the lists were very similar. I noticed it with other factions as well. So, for example, there must have been half a dozen League of Votann players there. Every single one of them had essentially a couple of Hecaton land fortresses, a few squads of the Hearthkin, and then Berserkers and other bits like that. And obviously the Pioneer bikes as well. So kind of interesting how, two factions having such cookie cutter lists. I also saw, interestingly, a lot of Tau Riptides. It was under my understanding that I thought that Tau loved their crisis suits and hammerheads and stuff, but I actually saw multiple players fielding 3 or more Riptides pretty much in all their lists. So I found that kind of interesting to note as well. Where I saw some of the variety was down near sort of, I'd say, the other end of the table, other end of the scale, in those sort of slightly lower tier factions. So I found that there was about 4 or 5 guard players at the event, and no one had the same list. There was one guy who was running gunnery experts and spotted details, and he had a nice hybrid guard army. There was one guy that had, a Baneblade. There was some chap that had turned up with a bunch of infantry, and then there's obviously me with my armoured company. I think that was about the 4 guard players that were there. So we all had completely different lists, and our performances were all very, very different throughout the event. So that was kind of interesting to note. And I also noticed that with some of the Genestealer cult players as well. They really just were taking kind of a bit of a hodgepodge. So it really seemed to me that there were certain factions that were really, basing their tournament performance off net lists, and there was other factions that were kind of definitely more of a melting pot of ideas. Don't know if that represents the power of the faction or the mindset of those different communities, but I did think that was something interesting to note. One thing I did also notice is that there was a huge amount of variety in the Custodes list. I don't think I saw the same 2 Custodes lists. Now, the reason I mentioned that is a little bit of an exception that proves the rule, because obviously Custodes are actually in a good place right now. They're on like a 50+% win rate, but the players were using lots of different things. There was one chap there that was running 3 of the big grav tanks. There was another guy there, Tom, who's joined me on the Morning Glory team now. He just had 1 of the grav tanks, and the rest of it was a nice mixture of infantry and bikes. And then there was another one of our club mates there called Scott, who was running about 5 or 6 dreadnoughts. So there was quite a lot of variety in the Custodes players, which was cool because they are more a top tier faction. You would expect them to be a little bit more net listy. Now, I mentioned Votann earlier. One of the observations that I made over this event was that whenever I got a chance to observe a Votann game, it tended to go sort of one of 2 ways. Either the Votann would march across the board, absolutely annihilating everything in their path and essentially winning via pure damage output alone. And they tended to do this against less experienced players who would try and fight them head on. Or you had the situation where you came across a much more experienced player who was playing it much cagier, and the Votann then seemed to struggle, and if their opponent was able to focus on scoring and not even try and engage in the Votann in any way, shape or form, then they actually tended to win. I saw a really interesting game on the top tables between two absolutely fantastic players, really experienced. I've actually had the pleasure of playing against both of them before in tournament formats. There was Adam, who was running the Necrons, and then there was Dylan, who was running his Votann. Now, I've faced Dylan a couple of times in these tournament reports. He's normally the Harlequin player that I come across, but he's onto his Votann now. And what was really interesting is they had what was, from an outside point of view, casual observer point of view, kind of an uninteresting game, but actually was very interesting for me to watch, because Adam literally moved on to the objectives with all his combat stuff and hit it out of, as best he could, out of line of sight of the Votann. And then Dylan just could not really engage with it. And the problem is that if Dylan moved his Votann forward to try and get angles on the Necrons to try and blow them off the objectives, it was tricky for him to do that due to a lack of indirect fire and how dense the boards were. And if he got too close, the Necrons could easily boil out and just start ripping his forces to pieces. And as a result, the Necrons easily won that game. And in fact, I spoke to Adam afterwards, and he said he didn't actually have to do very much apart from move his guys around and then make the occasional armor save when Dylan was able to get a slight angle on him. So I thought that was kind of interesting to note, that if you don't let the Votann do what they want to do, and you don't let them play you don't play their game, you make them play your game, then actually they can be kind of tricky. They got the damage output, but they struggle on scoring. But yeah, that was essentially my round 2. And I have to say, guys, it was actually strangely pleasant. I mean, of course, I love playing 40k, but it was nice to have that sort of midpoint break in the first day of the event. And I was able just to go around and, a bit like a wildlife observer, just watch people play their games and get a feel for it. And just, ask a couple of questions, not get involved, because obviously 2 people are playing games. I don't want to distract them too much. But, just sort of observe the wider picture. So I actually quite enjoyed it, to be honest, guys. But obviously, after a full sort of, I think it was like 2 or 3 hour break waiting for the round to end, I was raring to go for game number 3. So let's dive into that one right now. So game 3 comes around, and I am absolutely raring to go after having a nice break. And I get paired into another Imperial Guard player, an absolutely lovely chap called Sonny. Now, I really enjoyed this game. Sonny absolutely had embraced what it meant to be in the Imperial Guard. He had brought a motherfucking Baneblade. And I tell you what, guys, you don't appreciate how massive and intimidating a Baneblade is until you're facing off against one. You're like, hang on, I don't know if I actually have what it takes to deal with that thing. The Baneblade was actually genuinely a really difficult thing for my army to deal with, because outside of my 3 demolishers, I am packing a hell of a lot of flamers, and well, flamers really aren't even going to tickle the side of a Baneblade. So whilst I was fairly confident going into this game, I've got a fairly good track record on guard versus guard games. I was, still a little bit apprehensive, because I wasn't 100% certain if I had what it would take to deal with that Baneblade. So the mission was the Scouring, and that means that it was a 5 objective map, and both players got to deploy in the short table edge of their deployment zone, so we were quite far away from each other. And it was hold 1 objective, hold 2 objectives, or hold more objectives. So a little bit easier than what the first mission that I played in the tournament. Now, my plan with this game was fairly simple. I knew that the Baneblade was going to struggle to maneuver around the large bits of line of sight blocking terrain, and also there was dense terrain over pretty much everywhere it could move. If you have a look at the map, guys, you can see those grey circles and rectangles represent craters and forests, and all of those slow down movement for land-based units. So I knew that Baneblade was going to struggle to go more than 8 inches anywhere that it went. So as a result, I was like, well, you know what? I'll just play around the Baneblade, and I'll just kill everything but the Baneblade and score my victory points. And that's really what I focused on this game. I took my usual special orders, boots on the ground, and inflexible command, and I was able to happily score my victory points fairly consistently throughout the tournament. I was really able to dominate on the middle objective as well, simply due to the fact that I had a lot more infantry than my opponent. I actually had, 60 infantry, and Sonny was rocking about 40 in total, including like officers and advisors and command squads and stuff like that, which meant that I was, and thanks to the fact that I also had more indirect fire than him, it meant that I was able to essentially not worry about him sniping me off objectives, whereas in return, anywhere that he hit, I could happily land a couple of manticores and a mortar battery on top of it and basically delete his infantry fairly quickly. And to be honest, guys, that is what I did. I focused on removing the infantry first because I knew that once they were gone, he really had not much he could do in terms of trying to threaten the objective. At that point, he would be reduced to pure killing power, and I knew that also his pure killing power was mostly direct fire. So the first things to go were the infantry. Second things to go were some of his fast movers like his Valkyrie and his Sentinels and his Taurox Prime, and then I focused on the Leman Russes as well. He had 2 Leman Russes to my 3. I was able to get both of those along with the infantry in the first 2 turns. And the last thing that I focused on was the indirect fire. His Basilisk had been pounding away trying to stop my Manticores from doing what they needed to do, but it was going across dense terrain most of the game, so it was struggling to get any hits. Any it did land, I was able to use jury-rigged repairs as and when I needed it to put a couple more wounds on my Manticores over the course of the game, and I was also able to use Relentless as and when I needed it to make sure that they were firing at full profile. Now, it didn't go all my way. I don't want you guys to think it was a cakewalk. Sonny did make a pretty good game out of this, so he by the end of the game, I had lost most of my Chimera fleet, and one of my Leman Russes was pretty badly damaged as well. My Manticores had finally started to degrade from his Basilisk as well, and then but really, by the time the dust settled, I still had, I'd say about 50% of my army left, and Sonny was kind of rocking around with the Baneblade and a couple of characters in the backfield. And really, it came down to points. And unfortunately, because I'd been able to, essentially delete most of Sonny's infantry in the earlier stages of the game, it meant that he really did struggle on points. But it wasn't a smashing. It wasn't a 20-0 in any way, shape, or form. I believe the final score was like a 15-5. I think overall I got sort of 90 odd points, and Sonny was able to get, I think, 60 odd points. So there was still plenty of points flowing for both teams, and Sonny did make a really good go of it. So well played to him. So that was the end of game number 3, and that was the end of day 1. And at the end of the day, I'd had an all right result. I mean, I had got 1 loss in my first game. Technically, I got a win in my second game, but it was a bye, so I'm personally counting it as a draw. And then I got a win in my final game. So as the day went on, my score sort of improved, which was very nice. I don't mind going 1-1-1 in the first day of an event. I tend to feel like if that was a one-day tournament, I'd be on a 50% win rate, which is pretty nice. I always try and maintain at least a 50% win rate with the old 8th edition Codex, because it is tricky to get above that. You sometimes can go 3-2, but often I tend to find myself going 2-1-2 with the old girl. But yeah, so far she was doing all right. But the main thing that had really stood out to me was just that random damage on my Demarche counts was so frustrating. I will get into this a little bit more at the end of the video, but I just want to say, after playing a month with the new Guard Codex, with all the lovely flat damages and just the reliability, going back into playing the old Codex and just seeing how swingy everything is, even with gunnery experts, it really was quite the exercise in frustration. Just everything, like random shots at the beginning, and then just random damage at the end. It was just very frustrating. And like I said, I didn't think that I rolled more than a 2 on my damage, or pretty much the whole tournament, guys. But that was sort of the main thing that I was feeling by the end of the day. That I was pretty happy with my performance, but my God, I can't wait to be allowed to use the 9th edition Codex at tournaments. So going into day 2 and going into the 4th game of the tournament, and I got paired into Custodes. Now, I actually have a fairly good win rate versus Custodes, and this list itself has actually taken them on and done some pretty good smackdown on them in the past. However, I was facing a list that I haven't normally faced, and that was a list that had lots and lots of the Caladius grav tanks. However, I was pretty confident that I could deal with them. I mean, at the end of the day, I've got as many demolisher cannons as he's got his Caladius guns. I've also got indirect fire. Weirdly, my mortars are kind of good into them because I've only got a 3-up save. So I figured I'd actually be alright. The only thing that actually really concerned me was the Custodes bikers that were also in the list. But I figured, you know what? It's only 6 bikers. You know, I've dealt with twice that number before in the past and just not had a problem. Now, the mission for the game 4 was secure missing artifacts, and that's a fairly simple one. Essentially, there's 5 objectives. Both players get to move 2 of the objectives around, apart from the center one. And if you hold the one that is your priority objective, you get the 3 extra points every turn. It's kind of difficult not to get those 3 extra points, to be honest. Now, I actually deployed fairly aggressively on this map, and the reason for what that was, there wasn't actually a huge amount of line of sight blocking that was sort of further back, and there was a lot of dens that I thought I could take advantage of. I actually had 3 chimeras that were deployed kind of openly, but the rest of them were fairly well, but they were in dens, and the rest of them were actually fairly well hidden, as you can see from this picture. Now, the thing is that I figured that what I want to do is I want to deploy aggressively. My opponent would probably come flying in with his bikes. If he makes the charges, fine, whatever, not the end of the world. But then I'll be in a position where I can pick the bikes up in one turn. I mean, 3 demolisher cannons, 2 manticores should be able to pick up 6 Custodian bikers fairly easily. And then that means that then we can get into the firefight. And I am happy to get into the firefight with 3 tanks. So I've gone into firefights with many people, many different factions, and I always say, guard, win, firefights. Now, my opponent did get the first turn, and he did fly forward with his bikes. And I thought, okay, everything's kind of going as expected now. I'll probably lose a couple of chimeras, but apart from that, we should be good to go. But then my opponent's turn 1 shooting phase came around, and I knew that I was going to be in trouble. Okay, now bear in mind that these grav tanks are going to be hitting me on 3s, they're going to be wounding me on 3s, and I still actually get a 6-up save against them thanks to Armor of Contempt. He just did not miss a shot, guys. He hit with everything, he wounded with everything. I just didn't get any 6s. I always say fishing with 6 is difficult, but you know, one of them should come up here and there. And then he just went pop, pop, pop. He rolled high on the damage for all of his guns, and he just each tank just killed a chimera, which I was genuinely surprised about. I know they're big and floaty, but I've had more powerful weapons go into chimeras before and not do that much damage. So I was kind of surprised about that. And then to rub salt in the wound, the bikes fired their melter missiles, and again they were hitting on 3s, no rerolls, like sort of wounding on 3s, no rerolls, and they just hit with everything. Every missile hit, every missile wounded. I just didn't make a save, and by the time the dust had settled, and after the bikes had charged in, I had lost 5 out of 6 chimeras. Now, I wasn't expecting to lose that many, I'll be totally honest with you. Bear in mind that a lot of them were out of line of sight. If they weren't out of line of sight, they were in dents. It really felt like I should have lost at most 3. I expected to lose maybe 2 from shooting and 1 from spears. But look, my opponent's dice were just on fire. And then that continued into my turn 1. Because there was, in front of me, 6 Custodian bikers. No characters, nothing special about them, just 6 Custodian bikers. I had 3 demolisher cannons, and I had 11 heavy flamers in range of them, and I had 2 manticores in range of them, which I was also able to use direct fire, so one of those manticores hitting on 3s, and I also had about 30 infantry that could see them as well, okay? And I fired everything, and my God, swingy dice, man. Swingy dice. You know, I said earlier how I've been struggling with demolisher cannons with a bit of an exercise and frustration. This was the game that epitomised it. Despite the fact that I had Despite the fact that I had gunnery experts, I didn't roll above a 5 or a 6 with the number of shots with any of my demarcher cannons. Despite the fact that I was hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s, I basically didn't get any hammer of the Emperors. And when I did get the shots through, I was rolling 1s for my damage, just constantly. No flat damage, just it was painful, man. One Leman Russ tank commander open fired and killed nothing. He did like 2 wounds to an enemy bike. It was just insane. And it didn't help the fact that my opponent was just rolling 4-up invulnerable saves like an absolute giga chat. I wasn't even mad. I was impressed. Okay, like it was just one of those games. And I don't want to say it was down to dice. It wasn't. You know, player skill certainly comes into it. My opponent knew where to place his shots. His target priority was on point. But a difficult game was made worse, I would say, by some tragic dice on my end and some very good dice on my opponent's end. And after the dust has settled, guys, I kid you not, 3 full demarcher cannons, 11 heavy flamers, all with gunnery experts, all hitting on 3s, drilling 1s were also hitting, and then also all the small arms for the infantry and 2 manticores, both of which were hitting one of which hitting on 3s thanks to direct assault. I killed 3 bikes, and that was it. That was it. And to be honest, guys, that was game. Realistically, that was game, because at that point, if I'd been able to kill both units of bikes, it would have been, you know, okay, yeah, his bike captain would have come in, and then that might have been a bit of a problem. But I could have probably dealt with the bike captain for a turn, and then we've got turn 3. Onwards to get into the firefight, at which point I'm confident that I win that. As it was, it took me until turn 3 to kill 6 bikes, and I had my demarchers for most of that. It was just one of those games, guys. Sometimes it happens, but even though I got absolutely spanked, and even though by the end of the game all I had was 2 platoon commanders, one in 2 table quarters, I still was able to score, I think it was 70 victory points to my opponent's 90 something victory points, which actually I was able to deny him some of his victory points as well. So it was about 70 victory points to about 90 victory points, and so the final score wasn't actually that bad when it came down to the point differential. I was actually able to get quite a few points for my team, which wasn't too bad at all. I think overall we lost that round anyway. It was just one of those where unfortunately we all just got a few bad matchups. It happens sometimes. But yeah, I actually was fairly impressed with that performance. Bear in mind, guys, all I killed the whole game was those 6 bikers. After that, I just didn't kill anything. All right. So despite the fact that I lost nearly my whole army and only killed 6 units from the enemy army, I was still able to score 70 victory points and still able to deny some victory points for my opponent as well. So whilst it was a bit of stomping, I was overall fairly happy with the result. And so we arrive at game number 5, the final game of the final tournament I am going to be running this 8th edition Codex in. And it was kind of a sad moment, guys. It was kind of like, holy crap, you know, this faithful steed that's been with us for so long, this is the final, just one more game, darling, just one more game. Do us proud for one more game. If you can just get one more win for us, that'll just be great. But I didn't want to put any pressure on the old girl, you know. She's done us proud of the old 8th edition Codex. And it was the last game of the day, so I was like, you know what? We'll just play it and take it how it comes. And I actually got to play against Tyranids, which was a matchup that I really wanted because it's a classic matchup. I didn't care if it wasn't good for my army. I was actually playing against a chap called Ben, one of the nicest people I've ever come across. Just honestly, probably my favourite opponent from the tournament. All of my opponents were lovely, but this guy was just so chill and just so lovely to play against. So the mission was tear down their icons, which is a 5 objective mission with the standard hold 1, hold 2 or hold more. The second part of the primary, the tertiary, if you will, was basically if you get an infantry unit and tell it get to do an action, it'll drop a little bomb on the ground, a little token, and if at the end of the game your opponent hasn't gone and defused that bomb, then you get a few extra victory points. Me and my opponent both ended up placing 2 bombs over the course of the game, so it meant that we didn't really swing the outcome of the game either way. We just made sure that we both essentially equaled each other on bombs, which was pretty cool. Now, Ben's list was a pretty good Leviathan Tyranid list. It had the Zonothropes, it had the Malinceptor, it had the Harpies, and it had the Exocrine, and a smattering of little bugs to support it as well. I actually quite like the list. It's been a long time since I faced a psychic heavy Tyranid list, and of course it is very good into my army because my army relies upon armor saves and being hard as nails and armor of contempt, and mortal wounds just go bleh to all of that. So this wasn't actually a great matchup for me on paper. But I kind of realised in reality that the fact that most of his mortal wounds are just targeting the nearest unit means that I can kind of dictate what he brain melts, what he mind bullets, and it means I get to choose what dies on my side of the board. And as a guard commander, sometimes you have to make those difficult decisions. So I actually found that it was an easier matchup than I expected it to be going into the game. To be clear, I'm not saying it was an easy game at all. No way, shape or form. I was just kind of expecting it to be a bit of a brain melter, and as it turned out, I was actually able to kind of play around it and make the mortal wounds work for me in a funny sort of fucked up kind of sense. Now, in terms of secondaries, I picked the same 3 that I picked all tournament. I decided not to break with tradition, and Ben picked Bring It Down, Psychic Interrogation, and RND. Now, I actually went first in this game, and I think it was the first time that I went first in the whole event, which was actually quite nice. I didn't really know what to do with myself. So what I decided to do was to push on to 3 objectives. So I got special orders off straight away on the middle one, because I knew it'd be tricky to do that later on in the game. And I got myself into a position on the top left and top right objective as well. Now, I split my force into 3 armored platoons. I had a Lehman Russ and 2 Chimeras go north, same in the middle, same in the south, and I had a platoon commander in the north and in the south, and then I had my other platoon commander babysitting the mortars and the manticores in the back holding my objective. Now, I wanted to be in a position where I could essentially get special orders in the south the next turn in that bottom right objective, and so that's where I focus a lot of my firepower for the first 2 turns. Initially I was putting mortars into the termagants, but I did that once and then they all regrew with Endless Swarm, which wasn't great. So after that I was like, you know what, manticores and mortars are just going to pound into Zonothropes until they just go away. Now, Zonothropes are actually a really interesting target now. I'm so used to them being 3 wounds, 3 up invulnerable save, that when I found out they were only a 4 invulnerable save but 4 wounds, it was kind of like, I think weirdly I prefer it that way, even though it kind of, obviously messes up my flat damage 3, means 2 missiles are required to smote a single Zonothrope. It did mean that I didn't have the absolute just frustration of trying to get through a 3+ invulnerable save. There's a reason GW's got rid of most of those from the game. They're just too damn powerful. So that's where I spent my first 2 turns, essentially just clearing out the Zonothropes in the south and the warriors as well. So by the end of the first 2 turns, I had managed to successfully complete special orders on the middle objective and on the bottom right objective as well. However, I was starting to buckle under the psychic onslaught of the Tyranids. In fact, Ben spent his first turn, he flew his Harpies over and was able to do some damage to my Chimeras. Unfortunately, he kind of bounced off the Lehman Russes, and in fact the Chimeras really took the worst of it in this game. They pretty much all were dead by the end of sort of turn 3, and that was just thanks to the fact that I was, those mortal wounds were just even if he can't see them, that Malinceptor just does mortal wounds to things. So it was pretty gnarly to say the least. But what was dying was Chimeras, and what was living was my OBSEC infantry and my Lehman Russ battle tanks, which was kind of the way that I wanted it. So by the end of turn 2, this is kind of a picture you can see sort of from the end of turn 2. You can see that I've got that bottom objective there. I'm sort of, no one's really holding that middle one, and although I do have a couple of infantry sort of running around left over from an earlier push, and then obviously the north is fairly in my favour. sort of turn 3 and 4 come round, and I decide it's time, now that the south is kind of dealt with in terms of the main firepower. Things like, like a single zonothrope there, and 10 little bugs. I decided to switch up and go into the north instead. So turns 3 and 4, I pick up the zonothropes that are in the north there. I get the parasite of Mortrex, whatever it's called, and I also am able to deal damage to the harpies as well. They were picked out of the sky, and then the little bugs as well. That was all that was sort of dealt with turns 3 and turn 4. So we get to the sort of the penultimate turn of the game, or we get to turn 5, and the lay of the land is that at this point I've lost I think all of my chimeras, but my opponent and my Leman Russes are still relatively intact. I think maybe one of them has gone pop, but at this point, essentially my opponent, all he's got left is his Hive Tyrant and his Malinceptor and his Exocrine, and I still have about I have a tank commander and about 15 infantry down on the southern flank. I have a sort of similar situation on the northern flank, and then the middle I've kind of forgone at this point. So in my turn 5, I decide to just go for sort of as many points as possible. I push out into as many table quarters, get as many boots on the ground as I can possibly get by the end of the game. I'm like, I don't care if these guys all die now. I just need to score as many of my points as possible. So I managed to be able to max out on Flexible Command my turn 5, and I'm also able to get lots of boots on the ground points as well. And I've got most of my special orders at this point as well. Don't quite max, but I do get most of my special orders at this point. And so by the end of the game, I'm actually sitting on a really respectable 92 points, because I've got 10 on special orders. I've got 13 on boots on the ground, because I was just really aggressive with the last 2 turns. And I've maxed out on Flexible Command, and I think I've pretty much maxed out my primary objectives as well. And because I killed most of my opponent's objectives secured in the first 2 turns of the game, I found it relatively easy to just deny him his primary points. In fact, for the first 2 turns, he didn't get more than 4, and it wasn't until turn 4 that he got 8, and then turn 5 he was able to get the big 12, but he did go second, so that kind of makes sense. So whilst I had scored a lot of points and I had been able to deny my opponent a fair amount of his points, don't think that I got off unscathed. By the end of the game, on Ben's turn 4 and turn 5, the Tyranids truly went on a rampage, and by the end of the game, I had only left 2 Manticores with no missiles in them and a single platoon commander. I had lost 95% of my army easily, but in exchange for their lives, I had scored 92 victory points, and my opponent had only scored 74. So they gave their lives dearly to deny the enemy many of their primary victory points. A big thing was that I really denied Ben his RND as well, because he only had 1 unit of gargoyles that could realistically do it after turn 3. And I said to him, if you move those gargoyles off, you've got a single squishy character holding your backfield objective, and I've got a squad of mortars and 2 full-pedal manticores with a couple of missiles left each. I'm going to bomb him, he's going to die, and then at that point, you're really going to struggle to start having to move stuff back onto that objective. And he actually, he went to CP, he started taking the models off, and I told him that, and he went, okay, fair enough, mate. And we worked out that if he had done that, he might have got 1 more R&D, so he might have got 4 more points out of it, but basically his primary would have completely tanked. He wouldn't have got very much at all. So in the end, it was probably actually the smart choice from Ben to protect that sort of backfield objective, because you don't want to give Guard the opportunity to pick up a single model on a back objective, because they'll do it. But yeah, that was game number 5, a classic Tyranid versus Guard matchup with Imperial tanks taking on enemy massive bio constructs. It was a ton of fun, and I don't think I could have ended the tournament and ended my tournament career with the 8th edition book in a better game. I played against an absolutely fantastic opponent, a real gentleman. I mean, we were both being so nice throughout the game. Like I said, I let him know about that thing. If he goes off that back objective, I'm going to take it off him. And, he let me do a couple of takebacks. I let him do a couple of takebacks. At one point, he forgot, his Exocrine, and it was halfway through my turn. I was like, dude, just shoot it. It's fine. It's not a problem. It's the last turn. So what a great way to end the game. A classic matchup against a great opponent. two good lists battling it out. I think the last game was truly the proper send-off that the old Codex needed. And so at the end of the tournament, I had actually, technically, I had gone 3-2, but one of those was a bye, guys. So I'm going to count it as 2-1-2. 2 wins, 1 draw, and 2 losses. Because you can't really count a bye as a win. You didn't really face anyone, do you know what I mean? So not bad at all. Now, I don't know what... I know what my ending position was in the event. It was actually 25th out of about 80, which was pretty good. But like I said, again, that bye was kind of skewing it. I mean... everyone got a bye who faced that team, so it is what it is. But, you know, whatever it is, I would, even without the bye, give me a draw. I probably would have ended in the top half, which is more than I can really hope for with the old 8th edition Codex. So I just want to spend a few minutes at the end of this video going over my thoughts and feelings from that last tournament. Now, I mentioned this earlier on in the video, but it really was almost an exercise in frustration the entire weekend. And that wasn't due to anything to do with my opponent or my teammates or any of the matchup or anything like that. It was just having to use that old Codex one last time. Now, I am glad that we did give the old girl a bit of a send-off, but I have been using the new book for about a month now, and it's just very difficult to go back. I know a lot of us have been saying recently that guard are in an okay position. We've got armor of contempt, and we've got our, you know, good custom regiment traits and splashing ores and all this kind of stuff. Guys, you think you're in a good position, but when you actually get a taste of that proper 9th edition treatment, that proper power tuned up Codex, you realize you've not got it good, all right? Even with all of the buffs on the old 8th edition Codex, it really just isn't as fun to play as the new 9th edition one. The 9th edition one is just so much more reliable. How many times, even with Gunnery Expert, have you ended up rolling 2 or 3 shots with a Demartia cannon or a battle cannon? You just don't have that anymore. Now it's like, even if you roll poorly, you're still getting 4. You're more than likely going to get a decent amount of shots every single time. How many times have you fired those Demartia cannons or battle cannons or anything with a D3 or D6 number of damage and you've rolled a 1? There's nothing you can do about it. You just got to wear it. All of that's gone now. All of that's gone. Just so frustrating. It just feels like the new book. All of the randomness, all of the bits that just make it just a bit fiddly have just sort of gone out of it. So I did enjoy using the last Codex, but it was a very stark reminder that we have got a good Codex coming, guys. And I know there's some people out there that think the new book, they don't like it as much as the old one because there are units missing from it. You know, Yarrick's gone, Conscript's gone, Veteran's gone. And I know a lot of people don't like the way that it's been sort of restructured around the fact there's no set regiment traits, everything's custom. I know, guys, and those are all totally valid points of view, and I'm not dismissing them at all. But those people who think that the new book isn't as good as the old book, guys, trust me, it's so much better. And it's not just better in terms of power. It is a powerful Codex, the new one. I don't think it's Votan tier. I think there'll be some broken stuff like there is in every Codex that'll need FAQing, but I don't think it's Votan tier. But what I think is that the new book is going to feel just so much easier for you to navigate. No longer will you have all this wacky randomness on your weapons and on your moves and all this kind of stuff. Everything is just a lot more set in stone, which means it's a lot easier to pilot. So overall, I just have to say that I really enjoyed using the old girl one last time, but I think she has earned her retirement, guys. I think the old 8th edition Codex deserves now to be given, to be given an agri world to look over and to garrison. And I think, that's really where it is now. And the new book, it's now time for the new Codex to come along and really give Guard that power boost that we need. We do need it, guys. I mean, I played my heart out in every single one of these games, and there were some times there was just literally nothing I could do. So overall, I really did enjoy the tournament. Overall, it was nice, and it was a perfect ending to having the same. We've had the same Codex for 5 years. It was a perfect ending to a 5-year career for that old Codex. But now it is time for the 9th edition book, and now it is time for the Guard to feel great again. But that's all we've got time for in today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you smash that like button. If you want to see more of these tournament reports, I'm going to be doing a heck of a lot of them with the new 9th edition book. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Did you enjoy the video? Is there anything that you think I could have done better? All feedback is welcome. If you've really enjoyed today's video and you want to go the extra mile and support me and the channel and help me go to more of these events and do more of these reports, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It is thanks to the generous support of my channel members and my patrons that I'm able to do this full time and bring back many of these tournament reports and other videos to you guys. But I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.